Well, welcome back, folks. We're going to go ahead now and reassemble the oil tank for the YL1. Many of these things we've talked about already, such as the sight glass, the polishing, the cleaning, refinishing of the back plate, etc. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, as well as the powder coating of the tank itself. We've talked about that in some detail. There are two items I did want to talk about briefly, however, before we get into the reassembly. One is the outlet for the tank itself, which is right here. You will notice I left the original vinyl tube on just to act as a handle. That's all that's for. Later on that'll be removed. I'll cut that off. But I did wash this out really well. I flushed it in both directions to clean it. And in particular I want to talk a little bit about the gasket. This is the original gasket right here. It's a fiber type gasket. It is no longer available from Yamaha. So I went ahead and made my own. Now I didn't have the exact same material, this fiber. I did have cork. So what I did is I selected a similar thickness cork material. That's what you see right here. This is just a little piece of it. And you can see where I experimented a little bit with making of the gasket. Now, making of gaskets, I'm not going to take you through the entire process. That could be a whole video in and of itself, the making of gaskets. And perhaps sometime I'll do a video on that. But for now, I just wanted to briefly speak to how I made this gasket with this gasket material. I have a series of these punches. In fact, you can see this is the punch in my right hand that I used to create the internal hole. This is the punch that I used to punch out the gasket itself. And I have a series of these in all different sizes. So what I did is I selected the closest punch that I could find that matched the original gasket. I placed the gasket material here on a piece of wood. You never want to punch against metal like on a vise or an anvil, because you'll damage the cutting surface. And I simply punched them out using a brass mallet to create the overall outside dimensions size that you can see there. Then I took the smaller of the two punches. In fact, you can still see the core is still in the punch. I haven't even removed that yet. And did the same thing. I centered it and then punched out the center. Then in order to make sure it was reasonably round and clean, I used two reamers. This I think is a 1/4 inch. That's a 5/16. These are chucking reamers used in lathes and mills. And I ran it through initially to clean it up like that. Then I took the second, I think this might be a 5/16, something, 3/8. And I did the same thing with this one, like that, to make sure that the size was right, because it was a little bit undersized using this punch, so that I could, in fact, get it to thread over the threads of the fitting itself, like you see there. So that's the gist of how I made the gasket. In terms of assembly, get these items out of the way here. In terms of assembly, it's pretty straightforward. There's really only two things we need to be concerned about right now. And that is installing the outlet pipe here, and then the sight glass assembly. For the sight glass, which is what we're going to start with first, inside of this sight glass fitting, you can see there's a little ledge. And on that ledge is where this plate fits down onto. So I'll just do a quick little polish, because I've been handling this to make sure it's clean. Like that. And I will take this, get this up here for you to get a little better perspective. This is clean inside of here. Obviously the tank has been flushed out many times, and blown out. So the tank is clean. We talked about the repair to the seam, etc. So I'm just going to take this plate and drop it in place like that. And then I'm going to, just because I'm anal retentive, rotate it in such a way that the plate rests vertical like this, so that this part of the plate points to the north. It doesn't have to be. I'm just anal retentive, so I wanted to get the orientation symmetrical like that. Next thing to go on is the gasket. Now this gasket is the original. It's nice and flexible. It's clean. It's been generally immersed in oil for its lifetime. You can see that this side of the gasket, I could tell by the shape of the indentation, fits down against that plate, and then the top side, which is the side that I've got facing up right now, fits against the back side of the fitting, like that, the nut. Now the nut I did replate, I cleaned it. There's just ever so slight some surface rust along the edge here. I filed it to touch up where I had created some damage when I removed it with the brass punch. So I just touched it up, replated it, and cleaned it up, as you see here. The gasket you see here, I'm going to place down like that. You'll see, you perhaps can see the little red marks I put on here with a red marker to align that gasket with these three legs. Now the reason I did that is you can see in the back side of the gasket indentations where those legs met the round outside body of the plate. So I just wanted to make sure I maintained the fitment of the gasket onto that back plate. It didn't try to create new indentations. Probably wasn't absolutely necessary, but it made me feel a little bit better doing it like that. I'm going to realign it here a little bit. Some of what I'm going through now you probably don't have to do. It's just kind of who I am. We have the glass itself. Again, I've talked about that. I'll polish that up a little bit, make sure it's clean from my fingerprints. That just drops in like that over the top of that gasket and gets centered like that. And then the nut threads in. What I'm going to do is take a little anti-seize. Those of you that have watched me in the past know that I'm a real fan of anti-seize. I'm going to put a little anti-seize on the threads here. Don't need a ton of it. Problem with anti-seize is it's real messy. Set that aside. Clean off my finger. So now I've got the nut with just a little anti-seize on it, and this should thread right on. Like that. And I'm just going to thread it down right now, finger tight. To tighten the nut, I am not going to use a brass punch. because I will probably reintroduce a little bit of mushrooming or damage to the ears. So what I am going to do, use some masking tape like this, and you'll see why here in just a minute. I keep blue painter's tape like this around in different widths. I'm going to protect the finish is what I'm going to do here. Again, you're going to see why in just a moment. That's just temporary, of course. I'm going to use a strap wrench. Now this is an old El Cheapo strap wrench I've had around for a while, and you can see it's probably going to fail one of these days. But I'm just going to use this strap wrench to tighten down that, that fitting. And that's the purpose of the electrical tape. You're going to have to forgive me, I'm going to get my hand in here a little bit, because I've got to get this wrench down, and now I'm just going to snug that down like this. If I had the right type of wrench, there. If I had the right type of spanner wrench, I could lock it on and turn it, but I don't. So I'm not going to go off and buy a spanner wrench just for that. Now, when I put oil in this later, if I find that leaks, I don't think it will, but if I find that that leaks, I will then go ahead and tighten it up a little bit more. And then we have the fitting here for the outlet. Put a little anti-seize on that as well. And we'll put that grab a wrench here. I think that's probably 14. Yeah. And I'm just going to snug it up. Again, if I find in the future that leaks, I'll tend to that when the time comes. But I just got it snug down. You don't want to overdo it, especially with a soft material gasket like that. It's a cork. You just want to snug it up. Then it's a matter of putting this together. This is the cap. Again, I might replace that cap later. You can actually find these all over the place. They're pretty common. And then I have the two hose clamps that go on the hose right here. I'm just going to temporarily put these on the hose so I don't lose them and I know where they're at. When I install the new line on the tank. So there's the finished tank ready to go back on the bike when the time comes. I'll wipe this down a little bit more because I'm going to have fingerprints and everything all over it. But that's now ready to reinstall. That's it for this video. As usual, any questions, thoughts, concerns, drop me a note. Otherwise, thanks for watching.